What we're going to do is just have a little look at 4 statements and thinking about whether or not these statements are true or false. So if you want to pop your responses in the chat. Is the first statement true or false? Mental illness is rare. So feel free to unmute and respond, or pop your response in the chat, either's fine.
We think it's false.
False.
We know. Okay. Just let me open up my chat. Yes, that's the general consensus from everybody in the group, that that's false, and you would be right. Number 2, people with mental health problems are violent. Any thoughts on that one?
We're going with occasionally, but mainly false.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we think about generally speaking, we've got 1 true, generally false from the Methodist group. Depends what the problem is and how other people interact with them. I think that's a fair point to make. Generally speaking, it is regarded as false though. So people with mental health problems are rarely violent to others. If they have any violent tendencies, it's quite often about self-harming, hurting themselves. Number 3, people with mental health problems can't or won't recover. We've got falses on the chat.
We're going with false as well.
Yeah, you'd be quite right. That's false as well. And last question, people with mental health problems can't lead meaningful lives.
We're going false again with that one.
Yeah, you're quite right. There's lots of famous people. And it's not to say that to have a meaningful life, you have to be famous, but lots of famous people who are clearly leading meaningful lives are quite open about struggling with their mental health. So if it's successful people are capable of famous people are capable of leading meaningful lives, probably Joe Bloggs like you and I are quite capable of leading meaningful lives as well. Absolutely. Right, let's get off my chat. Right, but when we talk about mental health problems, what are we actually talking about? And it's in terms of what we're going to be looking at today, it's quite specific. When we're talking about mental health problems, we're talking about when someone starts to struggle with the natural process and the natural links between thoughts, feelings and behaviours. Because quite often you will have a thought, the thought will lead to a feeling, and the feeling can well lead to a particular type of behaviour. So those 3 natural human processes are really strongly connected in the brain. So each impacts on the others, and that can be either in a positive way, but it can be in a negative way. And when we talk about mental ill health, it's because those processes are interacting with one another negatively. So they're leading these negative thoughts lead to negative emotions, and then they can lead to negative behaviours. The good thing is, though, that when that process is negative, there are things we can do to disrupt it and try and change that relationship into a positive relationship. Okay, but that's specifically what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health this afternoon. So cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT, would very much focus on disrupting those negative processes in order to promote better mental health. Common mental health problems would be things like stress, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder and depression, and they affect roughly 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 people at any one time. Less common mental health problems would be bipolar disorder, which affects about 1 in 50 people to some degree, and your more extreme schizophrenia type of difficulties, which is roughly 1 in 100 according to the mental health charity Mind. Okay, so in terms of the mental health problems you guys are most likely to experience with the clients that you're dealing with, those are the 4 most common ones that you're likely to encounter. But what factors can affect mental health? And they fall into 4 categories. So the first one we'll just talk about are the biological factors, and that can be genetic. So for example, you as an individual, you inherit genes from your parents, and you can inherit what's called a genetic risk factor, which can give you a degree of predisposition to mental ill health. And my family is rather a good example. I can't go back as far as my grandparents because I've never met three of them. And the one nan I knew died when I was quite young. But if I look at my mum, really struggled with her mental ill health in her last 25 years of her life. I've struggled with my own. My sister's had her difficulties, and one of my brothers has had mental ill health as well, and my son. So there's a clear sort of pattern running in my own family, which would suggest that there's some sort of genetic link going on there. Brain functions can impact on mental health as well. Nutrition and exercise is quite openly linked to mental good health or bad health. So we know that if we eat well, we're more likely to feel better. And if we take regular exercise, particularly if you take exercise in the morning, that has physical and mental benefits, physical health and mental health benefits that last throughout the day, because you produce two chemicals. One is the endorphins, which means you're less likely to feel pain. It reduces your brain's perception of pain. And there's another chemical called BDNF, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that stands for, but BDNF promotes your mental acuity. So your thinking and decision making is improved because of this chemical that is produced. And clearly medications can impact on your mental health. Next group of factors that impact are the social ones. So the environment, that can be the environment you're living or working in, that can affect your mood and your mental state. And then basic things like, have you got sufficient access to sufficient food, shelter, security, and that can be your physical security, as in free from harm, or your emotional security, feeling secure in relationships. We've got spiritual factors. So the culture that we live in, there are some cultures where mental health or mental ill health is viewed in a very different way to other cultures. So it can be seen as very negative, as opposed to something that's just part of the human condition. So we have physical ill health as we can have mental ill health. So the cultural perception of mental health can impact. It can make it slightly better or worse. Our sense of identity, and then our philosophy, our faith, or our worldview can have a positive or negative impact on our mental health. And the last group of factors are the psychological factors. So childhood development. So you think about your relationships with your significant others, which will in childhood would be your parents, any grandparents, siblings, your friends at school. Your general attitude to mental health can have an impact on it. Talking therapies are designed to have an impact on it. And I've left schemas until last because most people who come on this training don't know what they are. And it's probably best to explain these to you by giving you examples. So a schema, think of them as a mental shortcut. And they are a set of social rules that you design yourself for yourself, depending on what situation you find yourself in. So think about when you're at home with your family, whether that's a partner or children or whoever lives in the house with you, and think about how you interact with them. How close do you stand? What sort of body language are you using? What sort of verbal language are you using? What can you get away with? What buttons do you know how to press? That would be your family schema, if you like. And I would imagine that when you're at work, that schema changes. So you would use perhaps different language when you're at work. Your body language might be slightly different. You might stand a little bit further back from people that you work with because you may not be as close to them. So you've got your family schema, you've got your work schema, and you'll have a social schema as well. So when you're out and about with friends, what adjustments do you make to your language and the way you interact with your friends? So you have these schemas. So whenever you change setting, if you're at work but you're working somewhere else, you can transfer your usual schema to the new workplace. Do you see what I mean by that? I'm hoping so, everybody. Nobody's saying anything, so I'm going to assume everything's okay with that. Has anybody got any questions on what's on that screen so far? Because there is quite a lot of information there. It's basically 4 groups of factors that can affect mental health, either positively or negatively. And then when we think about mental health, it's about recognizing that there's a spectrum. And at any one time, out of every 5 people, 1 in 5 will be excelling, 3 in 5 will be to varying degrees okay, but 1 in 5 will be in distress or crisis. So we can see the link there between the thoughts, feelings and behaviours that I mentioned earlier on in that blue circle. So we can go from cheerful, joyful, energetic, high performing when we're excelling, which, because you're feeling so fabulous, it allows you to do things you didn't know you could do. So you feel ready to face challenges and new activities. We can go to struggling, where we're starting to feel anxious, depressed and tired. So we're having the physical impacts of mental ill health. And that means we're only doing what we need to do. So we'll get up, we'll have breakfast, we'll go to work, but we're not great. We can function, but we're not feeling fabulous. And at the extreme end, we can be in crisis, where we can actually start to act dangerously, which perhaps having thoughts about harming ourselves, considering suicide. So that would be somebody who is in crisis. Okay. So what we're going to look at now is about self-care. So these are 4 factors in self-care. So looking after your well-being, taking time for yourself, being kind, and finding support for yourself. And we're going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail on the next few slides. In terms of looking after yourself, these are 5 actions you can take that can help you to take care of yourself. That's connect, be active, take notice, learn and give. We're going to go into those 5 things to do when we look after ourselves in more detail on this next slide. And I'm asking the questions now. So these 5 actions, the first of which is connect. How can I connect with other people? I'm going to ask you, as I put each of the 5 points up, I'm going to ask you for ideas on how you can do this, how each of you can do this. So if you want to use chat or if you want to come off mute, how do each of you connect with others? Has anybody got any thoughts there? So Tracy's suggesting meetings, phone calls and texts. Yeah, because if you're working from home, it's a bit more, it's a little harder, isn't it? About maintaining connections with others, let alone making new ones. So those are good thoughts. And Teams meetings or Zoom meetings, Tracy, as well. Saying hello, acknowledging random people when out and about. Yes, thank you, Mark. I actually consciously do that when I walk my dog every day, and I deliberately do that because I guarantee I see other dog walkers, and that's quite a sort of a social thing to do. And I guarantee everybody smiles at you when you do that as well. So you might not be having lengthy interactions, but you are maintaining those connections. You've got a sense of you're part of a group beyond yourself. I'm part of a dog walking social group. Any other thoughts, anybody?
Yes, we had very similar suggestions as what people have put in the chat, but one of the things that we actually said, obviously we're a group of people, a group of Christians who meet together regularly through church anyway, so we connect through our faith connections, as well as sitting here and sharing in this group today.
Lovely. Yes, thank you, Jill. Good. Faith can play, as we saw on one of the previous slides, faith can play a really important role in helping people to take care of themselves. I've got one of my friends who lives in Stafford. She has regular contact with her church group, and quite often with church groups they offer sort of mini groups, don't they, with particular focuses. So yeah. And again in the chat, Stuart suggesting going to activity groups within the community such as sports. Yeah. And remaining active is important. We're going to work, well, it's the next point actually, Stuart, so you've led me into that quite nicely actually. Tracy saying, I always chat to people who serve me when shopping. Yes, and I think probably that helps them as well, because can you think of anything more challenging than sitting for several hours at a till scanning barcodes if nobody is talking to you? So yeah, that's a nice one, Tracy. But Stuart suggested activity groups like sports groups, and the next point in terms of looking after yourself, how can I increase my physical activity? So any thoughts about increasing physical activity, or have any of you recently increased your physical activity?
We all said walking, ditch the car and the bus and walk.
Yeah, great idea. Lots of schools do those, what are they called, walking buses now, which is a really good idea for children to get them more physically active. Getting a pet, I got myself a dog, and that forces me to go out twice a day walking her. But I have altered my routine because I think I mentioned that if you do physical activity first thing in the morning, it's got benefits that last throughout the day. So I used to give my dog her big walk after I'd finished work. Tracy's saying she walks the dogs twice a day as well. Excellent, Tracy. But I would do the big walk at the end of the day, and thinking about it logically, I was getting the benefits and then going to bed really. So, or not long afterwards. So it made sense for me to alter when I did my dog's big walk, so she has a shorter walk at the end of the day. Any other thoughts about physical activities? Anybody go running? Any joggers out there?
I was going to say there's loads of apps now, and they're like that Couch to 5K and all those sort of things where you can do sort of free activities and running and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's Staffordshire County Council have the health and wellbeing website, and they review apps specifically to ensure that, basically to endorse and make recommendations about which apps are sort of safe for us to use in terms of maintaining the security of our personal information. But yes, there's lots out there. On a training session I was delivering this morning, a lady there had actually set up and was running a running group, because she was a lady on her own. She just didn't want to run on her own. So she says, I set up a group so I didn't have to. Lovely, great ideas. This next one's quite interesting. It's about increasing your mindfulness, your self-awareness. So becoming more aware of how you feel, what you're thinking, and if you think you benefit from addressing any thoughts and feelings, what you would do about them. So it's about increasing your self-awareness and thinking. The question that we had as an icebreaker, where I was saying, if you think about your mood, what's the weather like? It's about asking yourself that on a regular basis. So you train yourself to be more aware about how you are feeling, so you can spot any dip in mood, and particularly if that's sort of spread over quite a few days as well, because then you start thinking to yourself, oh, I've had a low mood for a few days now, I perhaps need to do something about this. What am I going to do about this? Okay, does anybody do that? Just sort of keep track of how they're thinking and feeling and thinking? I'm going to guess no, because everybody's very silent. I've started doing it a little more now. I've started delivering mental health training. Oh yes, beg your pardon. Somebody's saying that, yeah, Tracy's saying that she does it on a daily basis. Very healthy, Tracy, well done. I've started doing it a little more often since I've been delivering these mental health awareness courses. So and I have benefited from it, so I do recommend it. Learning, so learning something new. If you learn something new, or learn how to make something new, you physically change your brain because you're laying down new neural pathways. So your brain literally changes, and there's a benefit to one in terms of fighting things like age-related mental deterioration. So sort of Alzheimer's dementia type of deterioration. You can it helps to mitigate some of those changes. But there's a mental health benefit to learning something new as well, because it's that sense of achievement that you can give yourself. So can anybody think of an example? It doesn't have to be recent, where they've learned something new and felt good about achieving that. It doesn't have to be a qualification.
I'd just say that.
Sorry, do carry on.
I was going to say that since I've retired, on the 2 days that 2 days a week my wife still works, I'm learning to cook some different things, because I do the tea those 2 days. So that's been a learning experience for me.
And do you enjoy it, Mark?
I do. I was a bit apprehensive to start with, but yeah, it's actually getting quite fun. Yeah, more making up as I'm going along, learning, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Because actually you're doing something mentally beneficial, but it's actually quite useful, because, you know, your wife is benefiting from not having to come home and have to worry about cooking either, does she? So that's quite a kind thing to do for her too. Tracy saying, during COVID, I started candle. Do you know what I thought you wrote there, Tracy? During COVID, I started cuddling. But during COVID, I started candle making. So Tracy's learned how to make candles. Well done, Tracy. I'm trying to think of anything new that I've done, actually. Not recently. The only thing I can think of is when I did a big qualification. It is a few years ago now, but the sense of achievement and relief when I finally submitted my last piece of coursework. Because at the start of the course, you think you'll never get to the end of it, don't you? But I got to the end of it, submitted that final piece of coursework, and it was just like, there was a real sense of achievement, definite sort of mental boost, just not knowing whether I've passed or not, but just finally submitting that last piece of coursework, because I got to the end of the course. And last but not least, and probably most of you are already doing this actually, so giving of yourself. So think about any voluntary work that you're doing, your pastoral care at the church in Lichfield. Housing officer, Tracy. Are you problem solving for lots of people? Are they coming to you with wider issues than housing that you have to help to address?
Yes, it's a daily thing. Everything changes on a daily basis. And obviously we're in winter. January is not very nice. Cost of living crisis, lots of issues going on. So every day is different. There's always something new. And I try and support them as much as I can within my workload. And it can be little things like, I have a lady that doesn't get out very often. She suffers with bipolar. And our local church does on a Tuesday a soup and cup of tea lunch for a small donation. So I pick her up, take her down. She chats for an hour or so with different people, and the difference it makes to her is tremendous. And then I get a good feeling out of it, because I've sort of supported her, and I know that when I take her home, she's happy. So just once a week is such a difference to somebody in that situation.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah. It's a really good example, because I think part of your pleasure is seeing that she's happy for an hour or so a day on that one day.
Yeah, it's one of those roles that we have where it's not always rosy. A lot of the time it's lovely, and I really enjoy my role.
Yeah.
And then, like I say, just little things like that, supporting people who are struggling. And she lives on her own as well, so she's, you know, in a property on her own most of the time.
Yeah, so quite isolated. And,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic example
Mm.
of the benefits of going out of your way and doing that little bit more. Has anybody else got any offerings about giving of yourselves? I imagine you all are, but it's nice to have some specific examples before I move on. Okay, we're going to move on. Right, so support services. So I've grouped these into 3 categories. So we've got the self-care that we've just talked about. And quite often if we're working with people who are troubled, self-care can be overlooked. So whether that's a family member that you're supporting, or a friend that you're supporting, or clients and beneficiaries that you're interacting with on a daily basis that you're supporting, you do need to, your first protocol should always be making sure that you are looked after, because if you're not right, it's that much harder to do that job. So I won't read through each of the things that are on in that left-hand column, because we've just gone through those. But over and above that, you've got community support. So I've got some examples up there, and I'll have their contact details on a later slide when we get to the signposting. So we've got the Staffordshire Wellbeing Service. This is the NHS service that you can contact, and you can choose how to receive therapy, whether it's online, over the phone, or face-to-face. You can self-refer to speak to your local wellbeing team, and they offer a range of therapies, different issues that range from depression to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We've got the Staffordshire Network for Mental Health, SNMH, and I'll talk about their toolbox in a moment. So that's a charity that supports people who are at risk or are experiencing mental health problems. So you can contact them over the phone for free support. The phone isn't always manned, but you can leave a message, or you can email and make the same request. The toolbox is a mini assessment, really. The charity identify your strengths and achievements and design management plans to build what they call emotional resilience. So that's to help you to manage any difficulties that you've got, and to maintain a status quo, and then think about moving on. So it's sort of an assessment to come up with a bit of an action plan. Social prescribing link workers, relatively new role, generally accessed via GPs. I think in theory you can access them outside a GP surgery, but I've not come across any yet that you access outside a GP surgery. So these are individuals who, as I say, largely based in GP surgeries. They connect with people with local community activities. So they tend to have a more in-depth knowledge of their locality. And then they can signpost people to activities and services that would benefit them, specifically bearing in mind what training session you're on, looking at mental health and wellbeing activities in their area. So, for example, this morning, I was delivering a similar session to this to a group of people, and one of the ladies runs a wellbeing activity in the Staffordshire Moorlands area. So all her social prescribing link workers are signposting people to her to access that service. And then we've got the local neighbourhood projects, probably, that the link worker is signposting people to. So it's worth knowing about social prescribing link workers. I don't know if all of you were aware of those before today. If you're not, it's well worth knowing that if an individual is registered with a GP, that they have access to that person, who they'll have the medical input from a doctor, but they'll have that local support and what's available in their area via that individual. Another example would be Support Staffordshire offer a volunteer service. So if you're a member of us, organisations can post what volunteers they're looking for, and individuals can choose from what's available, because quite often voluntary work can be beneficial for people that are experiencing low mood and mild depression, low levels of depression, because they're accessing that support network and interacting with others and giving of themselves. So the things we were looking at in self-care can benefit people who are who've got those types of diagnoses. For more enhanced community support, we've got the single point of access, the mental health assessment. So an access team will provide advice and guidance to anybody who gets in touch, and they've got the ability to book straight into one of the improved pathway teams to minimise duplication, ensure individuals are supported by the right person at the right time. The mental health helpline, this is the Staffordshire Mental Health Helpline, is if you're feeling concerned, worried, stressed or low, or if you're worried about someone that you know. So the helpline listens to concerns, supports you when you need it, informs you about what services there are that may be able to help, and it helps you to plan your next steps. And finally on that screen, we've got the NHS Community Mental Health Services. So that's part of the NHS offer. Again, will vary depending on what area you're living in. Obviously, if anyone is in crisis, you can dial 999 as well. If you're in crisis, or if somebody you know is in crisis, you've also got that as an option. Okay, so those are the 3 levels of support services. And here's how to get in touch with them. So just scroll down there. So as I mentioned, Staffordshire Wellbeing Service, the SNMH and their toolbox, North Staffordshire and South Staffordshire single point of access, the mental health helpline, and then the community mental health services for the 4 areas in Staffordshire. Okay, so as I mentioned, anything that's underlined will take you, if you click on it, will take you directly to the website as well. Okay, any questions about what support is available? Locally and regionally? Right, okay, so sometimes you will be encountering people who have specific concerns. And particularly at the moment, finance is one of them. So Staffordshire County Council offer a website which is, sorry, my words have just gone for a moment. So Staffordshire County Council provides the Here to Help cost of living support site. And that links to lots of different types of support available to individuals and businesses. Because the government has given funding to county councils, so this is Staffordshire's offer through that funding. One of the things that's there is a benefits calculator, because I think it might have been Mind that did some research, and they found that 70% of people who are struggling financially haven't had an up-to-date benefits check or a benefits review. So a benefit calculator does take a little time to sit and fill in, and some individuals may need some support in terms of accessing it because it's IT and there's questions to be read. So with my dyslexia hat on for a moment, it might be that somebody needs to sit with them. So places like libraries or local support organisations may be able to offer somebody to sit with them while they go through it. It only takes about 10 minutes to go through. But Mind found that 70% of people that were struggling financially hadn't had an up-to-date benefits review. So this is a quick review. You do have to make sure that the individual's got certain bits of information in front of them. So that would be any savings, they've got their income, pensions, what benefits they're on. If they have a partner that they're living with, the same information about them as well. But it does only take about 10 minutes. And I've done it with 1 or 2 people at the Dyslexia Association, and we have found that there are little pots of money that they should be accessing that they weren't aware of, that they were entitled to. So it's well worth a look at. And then the second website on that site, Mental Health and Money Advice. This is an offer from Mental Health UK, which is a national charity. So there's lots of advice and tips on there. Again, it's got an online calculator for those experiencing issues, financial issues, but who are also specifically experiencing mental ill health as well. And this I find is a particularly interesting site because I had a go at this. So this is a national charity called Turn to Us. So it offers all the practical help that you'd expect to support people who are struggling financially. So it also has a benefit calculator, but this is the interesting bit. It'll do a grant search. And to test it, I did a grant search on myself. So I'm a single person, but I own my own home and I work full time. So I don't have massive issues financially. I did a grant search myself and I did find a grant that I could apply for, that I was eligible to apply for. So you input sort of your personal information. It does a search of your circumstances based against various grant criteria, and then it'll come up with a list of any grants that that individual might be eligible for. So again, if individuals are not great with IT or who struggle with literacy, they may need some support to be able to access that, but it's well worth having a little look at. And it also offers advice on such things as energy and water bills, because quite often energy suppliers, and certainly Severn Trent Water, who I get my water from, Severn Trent Water, for example, if an individual is in debt to them, they have the capacity, they have sort of a charitable branch to them where they can write off, depending on the person's circumstances, they have the option to write off up to 90% of the debt. So it's never completely wiped out, but they have the facility that they will write off substantial amounts. So it's always worth, if somebody has concerns about finances, it's always worth contacting energy suppliers to find out what they are willing to write off, and if they have a charitable branch that can help people who are struggling. Okay. So again, that underlined link will take you direct to that website. It's worth being aware with that site that some of the grants that they have on there, individuals cannot apply for. So it has to be a support worker or a charity or an organisation that the individual is working with to access support. They have to apply on their behalf. And that's just to ensure that it's a genuine person. So Citizens Advice Bureau are people that would be appropriate to make those applications on an individual's behalf. Okay, because it's a 2-hour session, I have built in a short break. So if you don't mind coming off mute or going on chat, because we're an hour in now. So I'm wondering if now might be a good time just to have a 10-minute break, everybody. I'm going to just stop recording for a moment, if I can. Right, pause. Right. Lovely. Right, so welcome back after the break. So here we've got more links to various websites. So the first one at the top is Staffordshire Connect. So this is Staffordshire County Council's website. You can search and find help and support in your community. So the link there takes you to an area of the site with a mental health focus. So you can personalise and narrow down either your search criteria or the search criteria of the individual you're supporting. So it can find things like clubs and groups that are useful if people are feeling low, if they're lonely or isolated. There's also a health and wellness section on that site, which got lots of useful information for other issues that may overlap with mental health, because quite often we know nothing works in isolation. Mental health may be one of the issues that an individual is facing, but they may be experiencing other difficulties that Staffordshire Connects can help them with as well. The Getting Support is a link to the NHS website for mental health services and support. The health and wellbeing apps I mentioned earlier, so that's Staffordshire County Council's website again, and that helps you to find approved health and wellbeing support apps. The link to Mind, the national charity, they provide advice and support for anyone with a mental health problem, but they also campaign to improve services and raise awareness and promote understanding. And the last one there is, again, Staffordshire County Council Mental Health and Wellbeing, it's basically a site which lists a range of mental health support available locally, along with their contact details. So these are all places that you can signpost people to. I'm going to move on now to barriers to disclosure. So this is a question that I'm asking all of you. So feel free to be mute or pop thoughts and comments in the chat function. So why might somebody be reluctant to disclose to others that they're struggling with their mental health, do you think? So Tracy's suggesting they're embarrassed, Mark saying pride. Yeah, any other thoughts, everybody?
We thought about the stigma that's attached to it. We feel it's getting better, but there's definitely a stigma attached to it.
I think that's a fair point. It certainly exists. It would be sort of a little naive to assume that no longer exists. Mark suggesting impact on their role or status. Tracy, they don't want to own up to it or perhaps acknowledge it. Yeah. Speaking just from my own personal experience, my first experience was postnatal depression it was about a year after my son was born. And for me, I didn't disclose it because I just wasn't aware, because it had been such a slow decline and steady decline. There was no big one day I'm okay and the next day I'm not. It was a really slow, gradual decline. So I didn't spot how low I had got from the starting point, if you see what I mean. And once I got there, I was actually too ill to do anything about it. I literally had to be physically told I was going to the doctors, and then started sitting in the doctors, and I couldn't talk about what was going on. So somebody else had to do that for me as well. I was literally too ill to disclose. It was somebody else who had to do it for me. So that might be a potential reason as well. But if we look at the next slide, stigma, as Jill's group mentioned, definitely still exists. Trust, you've got to be able to trust, have quite a high level of trust and a good rapport with somebody to disclose something so personal, wouldn't you say? What else have we got? Concern about appearances, so that sense of pride and concern about their impact on their role that Mark mentioned, embarrassment, a dislike of talking. Some people don't like talking about personal issues, so it's not a lack of ability, but just a dislike of talking generally. They might not be sure where to get help, might not think that they're bad enough. Concerns about treatment and side effects, might literally have a language barrier, not have the English skills to talk about how they're feeling and what's going on with them. And cultural perceptions are that mental ill health is not viewed in the same way in every culture. So there might be concerns what a particular community, how a particular community might view a diagnosis of mental ill health. So that might make people reluctant to look for and ask for help. So, I've given you the first answer. The barriers that we've just listed there then, how do you think they can be overcome or at least mitigated? Do you think? So pop it in the chat.
I think training would be helpful, because some services and stuff like that don't really know where to signpost. So if everybody has a bit more training, that could help.
I think that's a really valid point, actually, Sarah, because you might assume that it's talked about so openly in the media that everybody is aware of it, and it's one thing to be aware lots of people experience mental health, but there's not a lot of what you as a friend or family member, or what you can do about your own self-care. There's not that same level of information as promoted in the media. I would agree with that, definitely. So how else can we tackle barriers to disclosure as we encourage people to talk about their mental health?
We talked about raising the awareness in the places that we are.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I guarantee that's going to be cropping up on the next slide, which is the answer to this question. Any other thoughts, anybody? We'll go on to the next slide then and answer. Oh, hang on. Respecting the confidentiality. I mean, that's absolutely vital, Mark, definitely. It's not actually on the next slide, but it's about ensuring that people know that their confidentiality is going to be respected, whilst being aware of safeguarding concerns. Because remember, if you think that somebody's a risk to themselves or others, you have a duty then to talk to your designated safeguarding lead about it. Gaining their trust, definitely, Tracy, thank you. And building a rapport. So if we look at the next screen, I think Tracy's comment there is first one on there. So it's about building a rapport and trust. People are not going to disclose personal information to people that they don't feel are going to, that they don't feel they trust or have some sort of a relationship with. Normalising discussions about emotions and behaviours. So it's about creating opportunities to talk about them. That then becomes the norm where you are. So if everybody's doing it, it's nothing to be embarrassed about, is it? Or it's something that you can be less embarrassed about. So it's about changing, potentially changing a culture in an organisation. Allocating time. So if you're in work, you'll have, if you've got a system in place where you have one-to-ones or support sessions with a line manager, that can be a suitable time. But it might be meeting for a coffee informally. Finding somewhere quiet to talk about that as well. So I work in an open plan office, but we do have little quiet corners where you can go and have a sort of private conversation with somebody if you want to. Training around mental health, I think Sarah mentioned this. So you can source training around it. There are lots of free short courses and sessions. This will be one of them that are available. Mind Run, a 50-minute mental health at work course that's specifically looking at how to support people in the workplace. Mental health champions, so having somebody dedicated to talk to. So again, Mind have a toolkit to guide organisations to set up a mental health champions scheme. We certainly have them at Support Staffordshire. They're not called mental health champions, but that's effectively what they are. And identifying any other barriers to support, because it might not be any of the things that we saw on the previous slide. It might be that this person would benefit from going to this support group that runs on a Tuesday evening, but that person's got three young children and they can't be left. So the barrier to them going to access support isn't the embarrassment or anything like that. It's the fact that they've got childcare difficulties. So it's being conscious that there might be other issues or other barriers to somebody disclosing and accessing support as well. About exploring ways that you can minimise those. So there are some thoughts around what you can do to tackle disclosure. And then it's thinking about how we communicate with people. So over the next couple of slides, we're going to watch a video now. And then on the next slide, there'll be some examples of the type of language that we can use when we talk with people who are struggling with the mental health. So I'll just stop sharing the slide for a moment because I need to share a video. So Brené Brown is an American lady, but she's produced, I think it's a great video that it talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy and the additional benefits of using empathetic language rather than sympathetic language, but hopefully it'll be clearer. She explains it really well, and then we've got some specific examples on our next slide.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that video. I think she explains it so beautifully about how powerful empathy can be when it's recognised as needed. It's probably easier to show you some examples, actually, which I'll show you on the next screen. So she gave one in her little video there, which was you don't say, I'm sorry to hear that. You say something like, thank the person for sharing with them. But we've got some other examples there. So, are you overreacting, blaming the person effectively for feeling the way that they're doing? It's more about recognising how they're feeling or what they're going through. You're having a tough time, or that sounds challenging. And then exploring, if someone's come to the end of their difficulties, what's that been like for you? Because that coming to the end of difficulties can leave people feeling very low. So rather than the sympathetic, at least it's over now, and as she describes, silver lining the person's experience, it's allowing them to explain to you, how are you feeling? What was that like for you? Well, it might have been absolutely the worst thing that person's gone through ever in their lives. And they can explain that to you if you use a phrase like that. Whereas at least it's over now. It's actually a closing down phrase, isn't it? It doesn't encourage conversation. So empathy, she talks about, is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. You may not have gone through what they've specifically gone through, but you may well be able to understand how they felt. And it's making them aware that you understand how they are feeling. Sympathy is that feeling of pity and sorrow for someone else. So empathy is a very sort of level playing field. You are relating directly to that person, whereas sympathy feels like you're putting yourself above them and looking down on them. So empathy definitely encourages disclosure and conversations, whereas sympathy tends to be a shutting down of those conversations. So empathy is the more powerful tool if you're supporting somebody who's struggling with their mental health. Okay, but thinking about the conversations you have with people, we're going to explore some other things to consider when you're having those conversations. This slide here. So finding an appropriate place. I mentioned to you the difficulties in terms of the layout of our office. It's an open plan office, but we do have these sort of little quieter corners, I'll call them, that are probably in the workplace for us. They're the best place to have these types of conversations. It may be that you're better off going to a coffee shop and having a conversation there. going into somebody's conservatory or out into the garden. It's finding somewhere where they feel comfortable enough to have a conversation with you. Using that encouraging language to encourage them to talk to you. Not making assumptions. An example that was given in the training session this morning was an organisation was supporting an individual who was really struggling with their mental health and had massive financial problems. Their assumption was that the mental health difficulties would be eased if their financial difficulties were addressed. But actually, so they went along to the session all prepared to direct them to where they can access financial support and advice. But during the conversation, it transpired it was nothing to do, their mental health, the individual didn't see it as linked particularly to their financial struggles. It was something else entirely. So don't make assumptions about what's going on with people. And it's about staying out of judgment. So when you listen and respond, you're not judging the decisions a person is making, because they may be making decisions that you disagree with or that you wouldn't do in their position. But it's about accepting that when you're working with adults, they have free will and they're entitled to make decisions that may not necessarily be in their best interest. You can be there to make them aware that it can be having a negative impact on their mental health, but you're not there to judge or lecture. Being honest and clear, particularly if there are limitations to the support that you can offer them. Number 6, ensuring confidentiality, as Mark mentioned. But as I said, consider safeguarding if you've got concerns about their own safety, or if you suspect they're posing a safety to somebody else, posing a threat to somebody else's safety. You have a duty to inform them that you're going to have a conversation with your designated safeguarding lead, helping them develop an action plan. That doesn't have to be a big document. It could be like a 2 or 3 step process. I'm going to go and get you this information. When you've got the information, you're going to contact the organisation, and 2 days, so in 2 days' time, I'm going to give you a phone call just to check that you've been able to do that. All right, that would be a simple action plan. Encouraging them to seek advice, because rarely do we work for an organisation that's a one-stop shop for everybody's issues and difficulties. Reassure them that you're there to support them. Hopefully they'll be able to come back to you if they've not managed to access support, and about maintaining your self-care and seeking advice and support for yourself if you think you need it. So maintain that self-awareness, that vigilance about your own mental state, because if you look after yourself, you're more likely to be able to support other people with mental ill health who are struggling. Okay, if everybody just comes off mute or goes in chat for a moment, I just want to check that everybody's okay, that you've got no questions that you want to ask so far.
No, that's all clear, thanks.
Smashing, thanks, Mark. You still with us, Stuart? Tracy's good, thank you. Stuart's good. Sarah and the church group?
Yeah, we're fine, thank you. Makes sense.
Good. Okay, right, we'll carry on then. Linking with other services. There's different ways of linking individuals to other services. So that can be just handing somebody the contact details, a leaflet, or link to a website, giving the person the information to allow them to seek support for themselves. That would be signposting. The wise decision is to follow up with that individual once you've given them that information. When I saw you last week, I gave you that leaflet with the phone number. Did you get a chance to call them? Because sometimes you might hand that leaflet over, but that individual might not contact them straight away. So it's always worth checking in with that person to see what they've done. Referring, that would be formally directing the person to another service. So that would require their permission, because you're probably going to be handing over some of their personal information to the referring the organisation you're referring to. And quite often, what more often than not happens is a sort of warm introduction, which is going with somebody. If they're going to a new group or a service or activity, you'll go along with them almost as a befriender, if you like, to introduce them. That's not to say that you'll be going every week. Was it Tracy, were you going along to that group with that lady every week, Tracy?
Yes, I won't be going forward.
Oh,
Won't
right,
be going
okay.
every week with her. She has got other contacts. She's joined an art group, which is not far, so they're going to assist her as well.
Lovely. Because that's the idea, isn't it? It's about sort of empowering people, getting them to the point where they're independent and can do these things for themselves. Because that's progress then, isn't it? That's wonderful.
Introduced her to the group, so
yeah,
it's going forward, she'll be able to access it herself as well.
Lovely. So that's almost a type of befriending service that you've offered there, isn't it, really? So lots of befriending services do something similar. They'll go with them. It might be more than once. It might be sort of up to half a dozen times. But generally speaking, the idea is that eventually they'll be able to do that for themselves. Okay. We are going to talk about suicide specifically. So around 10 lives per month. So that's 120, roughly 120 people per year are lost to suicide in Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. So the Staffordshire County Council have the Talk Suicide campaign. So there's a leaflet. There's a link to the website where you can download a free booklet and enrol on free training. So it's only about 20 minutes. But the skills you gain can give you this, can help you to save somebody's life if you come across somebody who's considering suicide or having suicidal thoughts. I've enrolled on it. There is a bit of a waiting list, so it's something. If it's something you're interested in doing, I would advise you to look sooner rather than later, because there is quite a drive on this. So spaces are getting taken up quickly. The note at the top of the screen, it's really important to make a note of that. It's unlikely that talking about the risk of someone wanting to end their life will encourage them to do so, but ignoring the issue might increase the risk. So it's a case of see something, say something. If you have concerns about people, it is far better to say to them, I'm really worried about you. I'm concerned that you might be having sort of suicidal thoughts. Is this something that's gone through your head? And actually asking that question, because you're very unlikely to actually encourage somebody to take their own lives by asking that question. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the training now. So we've got 3 scenarios that I'd like you all to consider. So you will be using chat or coming off mute if that's okay. So what I'd like to do is I'll read the scenarios to you, and I'll give you a few minutes to consider for each of the scenarios, what strategies could you employ when supporting them, and what might help each of these people improve their mental health. So what strategies would you employ, and what might help improve their mental health? So we'll come to Anne first. So she's a colleague returning to work after some time off. She's discussing events that don't make sense. She talks about HR making things up to get her, and some of it sounds very implausible. She has mentioned ending it all. So what strategies could you employ when supporting Anne, and what might help her improve her mental health?
I think encouraging her to maybe make an appointment with her GP might be beneficial for her, because she could be referred to some sort of talking therapy and the opportunity to get some medication maybe. It doesn't say why she's been off, so that could have something to do with as to why she's feeling the way she is. And the way that she's mentioned ending it all. I guess listening to what she's saying and reassuring her.
Okay, some good thoughts. Has anybody got, thanks Sarah, has anybody got any additional thoughts there? Mark said it's important for employers to have proper return to work support processes. Absolutely. Anything else? Okay, so we've got plenty of thoughts about Anne. Has anybody had any thoughts about bearing in mind that, what we just talked about on the talk suicide slide, anybody got any thoughts about asking Anne about if she's having suicidal thoughts? Body support from Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. Because that's one thing I would definitely recommend doing, is asking her openly and directly, has she had suicidal thoughts? Because that's the entire foundation of that campaign, just on that previous page. If you've got those types of concern, if somebody's using that sort of language, ending it all, because very rarely do people say, I am considering suicide. They use vaguer phrases such as, I don't want to be here, I've had enough, I can't take any more, I want to end it all. So this language that might mean nothing but could well mean, I'm thinking of taking my own life. So it's important to directly ask her if that is effectively what she's saying. When you say this, do you mean this? Have you had suicidal thoughts? Okay. Let's have a little look at Badger then. So Badger is your friend, and over the last few months, you're seeing less and less of him. When you do see him, he's very anxious and withdrawn. Talks about being worried about his electricity being cut off and falling behind in his rent. He leaves you worried he's missing meals.
Maybe signposting towards that that website that you were saying, was it turn to us,
yeah.
Turn to us.
Yeah.
If he's worried about his electricity and stuff like that, to see if there's anything available to him in terms of extra benefits grants.
Yeah, there's a number of websites, isn't there, Sarah, that we definitely looked at that one, and that's probably better in terms of the grant search element, because that's a bit unique to that website. But Staff's County Council have got the benefits calculator that only takes 10 minutes. And if you're IT savvy and you've got all your information there, it literally only takes 10 minutes. So that's a really good thought, yeah. Because he's literally telling you, this is what I'm worried about. Yeah. So I think it's important to support him in addressing what he is saying he is worrying about. Definitely. Any other thoughts, anybody?
I think the fact that it mentions that you think he might be missing meals, I would ask him if he feels that he is eating okay, and if he's got enough money for food and drink and stuff like that. And again, maybe signpost him to a charity or a food bank or something along those lines that would be able to help him if he is struggling with food.
Yes, and it's important because if we go back to one of our earlier slides where we looked at the factors that can impact, we know nutrition can impact on mental health. So it might not be causing it, but it's certainly possibly not helping him. So Mark's popped in the chat, encourage him to talk about what's going on, why he's feeling as he is. Can easily say you seem to have changed or something similar. Yeah, it's about being caring, isn't it? But it's about giving him that opportunity to open up a little bit to you, particularly because it says he is a friend. So hopefully that would make it a bit easier for him to open up to you.
Louise, we had a few thoughts, obviously, because we're a group, we're obviously chatting amongst ourselves, but some of our group are going to share some thoughts with you.
Just really, you have to get their confidence, not to sort of barge in saying, go here, do this, do that. You've got to make sure that they feel confident for you to help them. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, we talked about the rapport and developing trust, didn't we? I think you've got a head start with Badger. I'm not sure about so much about Anne because it just says she's a colleague. So perhaps it sounds like to me like Anne you're not as close to as you are to Badger. You've got a bit of a head start with him because it actually says he is a friend. But I definitely think that establishing rapport and trust with Anne would be key to working with Anne. Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else have anything to share?
Invite Badger out for a drink and just have a social occasion where you can just let him open up. Somewhere comfortable.
Yes, we talked about finding an appropriate place. So potentially that could be just going out for a drink or inviting round to your house for a family meal. And then at least you know he's had one good meal that day. And yeah, it's about sort of giving him that, finding opportunities for him to talk about what he's worried about, other than his electricity being cut off and falling behind in his rent. Because if you can get him in that informal setting, you can then sort of say, funny enough, I know somebody else who's experiencing similar difficulties, and they were saying, if you go to this website, it's great because, and then signpost him to websites and things like that. It might just be about having a conversation with him. He may need some support with accessing the benefits calculator and things like that. But if you're not talking to him, you don't know, do you? Okay, Catherine, our Catherine, last but not least. So Catherine is a close neighbour of retirement age. You know she was furloughed from her part-time job during the pandemic, but you don't recall seeing her leaving the house since lockdown. What are we going to do about our Catherine? Any thoughts, anybody?
Our first response was the immediate one of going and knocking on the door and inviting me out for coffee.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Not seen you for a while, that sort of thing.
Mark's effectively said the same thing in chat. He's saying, check she's still there. I was thinking, check she's still alive for a start. But you're right, you do either of those things by literally going and knocking on the door. Maybe she's gone away abroad for 6 months because it's winter and it's miserable, but you don't know if you don't go and check on her, do you? Okay. So Tracy's saying, knock the door, shout through the letterbox. You can ask for a welfare check from the police if you're really concerned. Yes, you can. Well done. Thanks, Tracy. If nobody's got any more thoughts, I will skip through onto the next slide, because that's the thoughts that myself and a colleague came up with about what we do to support these, help to support these people. So ask Anne directly if she's thinking of suicide, encourage her to find a trusted person to open up to. Might be you. It might be a mental health champion in the workplace or a line manager. Calm, reassuring, non-judgmental, which is common to all three of these case studies, I think. It's likely Anna will require further help from wellbeing services or other professionals. And I think Mark was talking about sort of the process, the return to work processes. So a wellbeing plan to consider triggers and risks for her, done by the line manager. Quite right. So I think you ticked most of those boxes, guys. Well done. Look at Badger. Encourage him to open up, remain calm, reassuring, non-judgmental. Don't make assumptions, but there may be some finance or debt issues, which we talked about exploring. And talking about this may give Badger the confidence to reach out to services or family for help. So we talked about creating opportunities for him to talk openly with you about that. And finally, Catherine, she could be showing signs of depression and anxiety. Remain calm, reassuring, non-judgmental. Encourage her to come out for small periods of time might help. There's places of welcome, libraries, talking therapies might help. Support from a social prescribing link worker. Staying positive and encouraging is crucial for her. So I think, as I say, you ticked most of the things in there. I think the one thing we're missing actually from the Catherine scenario is knock on the door and check she's still there. But otherwise, well done, everybody. That was great. Has anybody got any questions? Because we are in the wrap-up phase of the session now, if that's all right. I'm going to stop the share. Probably going to stop the recording if nobody else has got any questions. Okay, I'll stop the recording now.